and welcome to the Cuyamaga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Rivera, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamaga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to expanding consciousness through the ancient practice of ecstatic trance postures. It was the insightful work of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman, who found the clues and revived the practice. She searched for the oldest evidence available, which she discovered in the world's collection of prehistoric and indigenous art, and decoded these selected artifacts as ritual instructions. And for a more complete introduction to the work and to Dr. Goodman, visit our website at cuyamagainstitute.com, or a simpler domain name to remember how to spell, trancepostures.com. And as an educational institution, we recognize to thrive, we must take an open approach. And we invite scholars of parallel research and related fields to help broaden the scope of our work and exploration. And on these Sundays discussions, we've had a really broad spectrum of topics from neuroscience, mysticism, trance states, anthropology, art history, archaeology, archaeoastronomy, shamanism, wisdom traditions, sacred landscapes, dance, sound, mythology, for example, much more. And again, all on our website, available on YouTube, many of these discussions, and you can follow through and continue with our exploration with us. And we continue looking at the connection in the ancestral wisdom traditions, revealing insight into the spirit of humanity. The most common accepted view in modern times had presumed that the social and political differences or divisions between men and women were natural. Then in the 1970s came the women's liberation movement, questioning this belief and arguing that divisions of labor and the different roles assigned on the basis of gender were no longer acceptable and not biologically inevitable. This is not a new conversation, though, once we take a look at the role of gender in ancient societies. Anthropology reveals gender's many roles in history, from accessing to resources to clothing, appearance, identity, personality, status and power, social roles, all throughout different communities. Today, our guest takes this topic head on and invites us to better understand gender fluidity and the concept of two spirits, which is the embodiment of both genders together. So, Laura, if you would please do an introduction for today's guest.
Well, it's exciting when things are all in motion, and gender being so basic, we don't usually examine it to this depth. But when society is calling for its re-examination and a reset, then it's good to turn to history, to anthropology, and to pull back and see where we've been, to better see where we're going. And I want to ask Christine and Todd VanPool, Anthropology husband-wife team at the University of Missouri, to introduce Mikaela Deimeke, as she is their student. And I can understand how exciting it would be to study with this husband-wife team of archaeological anthropologists, because they really encourage where the evidence goes, to follow where your passions are, to make it truly, truly exciting, and to be free thinkers within that realm. So
you flatter us too much, but we are delighted to introduce Mikaela. She's an outstanding young scholar, one of our rising stars, and is just doing some really great research. She has done some research as an undergraduate and just outstanding work. Right now, she's finishing up her thesis. She had planned to do some traveling to do some ethnographic work with the Zuni and some other Southwestern groups, looking at two spirits. But because of COVID, that research was unfortunately curtailed, especially given how hard New Mexico was hit with the COVID problems. And so she's instead using some archival research and doing some archaeological work, looking at information about two spirits of the past. And she'll introduce the concept of two spirits here in a couple of minutes. But it's an incredibly important aspect of the cross-cultural comparisons, cross-cultural analysis of gender. And again, gender is present in every primate species in terms of distinctions between males and females and how they organize their labor. And in humans, by the same token, it is present in every culture. So Mikaela will be able to introduce us to this concept and be able to kind of lead us through the way that gender can be constructed in different cultural contexts, as well as the fact that there are, in some cultures, additional categories of gender that are neither man nor woman, but something else. And so with your permission, we can turn over to Mikaela if she's ready.
Hi, Mikaela, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks
having
for
me.
tackling this very key topic that doesn't get enough discussion in an anthropological context.
Awesome. Yeah, well, do you want me to start my screen share now?
Oh, no, I want to ask, how did you get interested in this? What led you to study anthropology, and then what led you to study gender in particular?
So it's kind of like a messy story. I didn't really know what anthropology was when I started. I took a freshman cultural anthropology class. Just so happens it was a requirement or fulfilled a requirement. So I took an anthropology class. I was like, wow, I know nothing about the cultures of the world. Like I felt like I was in a bubble. And then kind of fast forward to my junior year at Mizzou, I went on a Mizzou alternative break, which is just like a service learning trip to Zuni, New Mexico. We just helped out on the reservation. We cleaned some things. We worked in the museum. But while I was there, I realized that I didn't know about their culture. And I wanted to. Like, we learned about the museum, and we got a really cool explanation of their creation story with a mural, and it was awesome. I was like, wow, I just really want to know about it. And then while I was there, I started asking questions like, how have outside cultures, like they're like a matriarchy, they're matrilineal, matrilocal. And I was just wondering how outside cultures that were very patriarchal affected their matrilineal dynamics. And then I took Todd's Anthropology of Gender class, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is basically what I was asking questions about. So it's like, okay, so I want to write a paper on the effects of the patriarchy on matrilineal societies. And I just wrote about their gender roles and like just the shifting dynamics due to the outside contact. Todd directed me to the Women in Gender Studies graduate conference at Mizzou. So I presented that paper on the gender roles and just like the different patterns that I found. And someone in the audience just asked a question. She was like, are you going to include the different gender categories that Native American tribes identify and stuff? And I was like, oh, I'm honestly not sure. I learned a little bit about it, but I wasn't really very well versed in it. So I kind of realized that the paper that I wrote was not really inclusive of their gender dynamics and just like the power relationships in the society. And that once I started digging into it, I realized that I didn't know about third gender categories, gender fluidity, because, you know, growing up, I was very much taught the gender binary, male, female, man, woman. And so I realized that if that's what I was taught, that's probably what a lot of other people were taught. So not only did I want to learn more about it, I wanted to like share my knowledge with everyone else too, because it's such an important part of society that so many different cultures just have this concept of gender fluidity that I think it's our responsibility to learn it so we can stop kind of imposing the gender binary on other cultures. And so we can preserve different parts of other cultures.
Well said.
Well said. So what is the most surprising thing that you've discovered to do with gender roles, and this emerging third gender? And
so I think my favorite thing about studying gender is that it matters in every society. So I have a slide on this, but like it's integrative. So say like something happens with the political system of a society or the economic system. So there's just like restructuring in just those aspects. A restructuring in those aspects can have unintended consequences that change the gender roles or, you know, end up giving status to some like a new group of people or devaluing a group of people, just as it happened with the Two Spirits. So it's just really important to understand that gender matters, and you have to look at it as a variable in society, or else you won't understand the whole picture that you're looking at.
Why do you suppose it's all in play today? And what does it have to do with the whole reset of women's power? Well, my question is better expressed as women are reclaiming our power. We've been doing that for a few generations now. So is it inevitable that this would also then go to those who are expressing two genders? Is this an inevitable?
I think, well, like historically, and I'll talk about this a little in my slides, but people that were able to transcend that gender boundary, so participate in male and female gender roles and just have those two spirits in them, were seen as like very sacred. They had a lot of power in them. They, a lot of times, if you were identified as a two spirit, it would be from a supernatural calling or a spiritual calling, like an omen or a vision, or like a dream quest kind of thing. So they were picked by the spirit. So they were seen as like very important in society. So that was like historically. So I would love to say that, oh, they would be the same going forward, but with, you know, colonization and just like forced assimilation practices into this gender binary, a lot of that's been lost and a lot of it's been forgotten. A lot of people just in Native tribes kind of lost that, and they were forced to lose the information. So it's not like any fault of anyone. It's just that they were forced to believe in this gender binary, you know, and there's a lot of quotes that I've read just from like elders and different things reading on two spirits that some cultures believe that without two spirits, their culture would not exist. You know, elders are saying that, but then there was an instance of a Navajo boy that identified as two spirit, and he was murdered by other Navajo men for being who he was. So, you know, there's this stigma. They've been definitely marked as deviant because, you know, colonizers and European settlers and even early anthropologists went into the reservations, saw this, you know, men dressing as women, women dressing as men, and kind of they labeled it as perverse. So they went in with these like claims of morality to be like, oh, we're going to help them be like civilized. So that in civilized in like European terms was like gender binary, like male, female, no deviation.
With the Bible behind you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that it was even recognized with the hermaphrodites of ancient Greece, Hermes and Aphrodite, that this concept of male, female combined into one being, and androgyny, so has long been in play. So it's a thing. And I'm going to ask later about seeing it in other species. Certain fish, I think, can change gender depending on what the climate or the temperature of the water is, or the need of the school of fish and all that. So gender is fluid also throughout nature. We're not alone. We're not alone in this.
Definitely.
We'll have plenty of questions after we go through the slideshow.
Would you like to do your slideshow then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Of course. Wait, let's see. There it is. There we go. So my title is The Anthropology of Two Spirits, but I'm first going to go over the anthropology of gender just to like get like a context and footing for you guys. And also I just really love this picture because it's so beautiful about respecting gender across cultures. There's so many different ones. So just take time to appreciate that. This is just kind of where I'm going to go. And then, so this is kind of a picture that I like to start with when I'm talking about just the difference between sex, gender, sexuality. It's the genderbread person. It breaks down the different definitions and things that we need to know about gender and sex really well. These two on the top, gender identity and gender expression, are really telling of the two-spirit tradition. Biological sex, sexually attraction, or romantically attracted to, all of that had really nothing to do. I mean, I'm sure it was a part of it, but with the two-spirit tradition, it had really nothing to do with biological sex, who they were, you know, partners with. It really had everything to do with their gender identity, the expression of it, and the societal and like economic occupations that they were engaging in within society. So just to put that in perspective, first I'm going to talk about just the difference between biological sex and gender, just kind of to get a footing, because sometimes it's hard to know what the difference is if you're not taught that there's a difference. If you're taught that they're connected, you're just going to think that sex is gender and gender is sex. Biological sex is just the differences between males and females, principally the external genitalia and the differences that each plays in the reproductive process, which this binary category is pretty convenient, you know, to start out with. Binaries are good to like start with research. They kind of give you a place to start and a place to ask questions. But then as you grow in those questions, binary categories tend to break down. So, and this concept. Approximately 1 in 2,000 people are born intersex. So an intersex individual is born with reproductive organs, genitalia, sex chromosomes that aren't exclusively male or female. So sometimes it's a mix of both. And a lot of times they're surgically altered shortly after birth per the doctor's recommendations. Actually, historically, there was a little ruler that they would use. I think it was called the phallometer, that if the appendage was a certain amount of like size, that it would be a male. And if it was smaller, it would be female. So it was kind of just this like doctor's decision that like from the external genitalia, but these people are intersex. So they're in the middle. So gender, contrastly to biological sex, is socially constructed. So it's the expectations in society about how people are supposed to act. It's this spectrum. I really like this picture that I have because it shows that, you know, there's two ends of the spectrum and there's a lot of different gray area in the middle. There's gender identities, there's gender expression, and along the lines of gender expression, masculinity and femininity exist on this spectrum. They're not set in stone, they're culturally variable. Just kind of think of like masculinity and femininity can be expressed through clothing, the way one dresses, the way one carries themselves, the way they talk, like the inflection in a voice, gestures, just the different things that they're doing. I mean, just kind of think of it in the ways that, you know, in the Scottish culture, kilts, they were seen as masculine for men to wear these like kilts and skirts. But historically, at least in the culture that I was brought up in, seeing a man in a skirt would be feminine. So it changes depending on where you are, who you're talking to. And I think that's an important distinction to understand, that not everyone views gender the same, and that it's important to understand how a culture views gender to understand the rest of cultural variables at play. So this is one of my favorite slides that I've made because I really like this little diagram that I have over here. I said this earlier, that studying variation in gender is super important, that it started, okay, I'll back up. Anthropological studies of gender really started when anthropologists wanted to study the relationship that existed between sex and gender. They wanted to know about it, you know, cross-culturally in different societies. So it started out with this binary, just looking at the relationship between sex and gender. And it's grown into this impressive array of literature that, you know, gender is integrative and it matters in every society, that the ways in which cultures construct gender inform all aspects of their culture. In this diagram, you know, I have like the access to resources. Paul said this pretty well earlier too, that clothing and appearance is affected by gender, social roles, the status and power that one's given in society, even the worldview, because, you know, gender is, I'll talk about this later, but gender, the Two-Spirit tradition is very well documented in origin stories and emergence stories. So those basically shape the worldview of a culture, where they came from, why they're here, identity and personality. I think that that all societies have some sort of culturally constructed gender distinction. And as Todd said earlier, we see this in primates too, and that gender is really at the heart of social identities. It's kind of a web of gender that kind of goes into how the kinship patterns are created, just how people organize themselves is very connected to gender as well.
And it took a couple of women anthropologists to really start to break that down and the definition. Yeah, like Margaret Mead and others.
Yeah, definitely. And there's this also, with anthropology of gender comes this public-private dichotomy that early on in the literature, so I think it was Michelle Rosaldo, it was 1974, she wrote a paper about the public-private dichotomy. So men are in the public sphere, so they're out in the world and like they're in society running things, and then women are in the private sphere, so childbearing, taking care of the house. So that dichotomy was pretty useful to start out looking at gender dynamics because we knew where to look. But once you look into the public-private sphere, you see that there's this overlap. So it's kind of like a Venn diagram, that it's not this distinction that, oh, women are here and men are here. There's different power dynamics at play and different things that, you know, men and women can do in society that affect the private and public sphere, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So just to kind of put gender in perspective and like understanding gender in society. I'm kind of going to go back to that service trip that I went on for Zuni, just to tell you guys a little story about it. This is when I really realized that I didn't know much about other cultures and I wanted to. One of the things or tasks that we had to do was we were going to help clean out the Zuni cemetery. And one of the stipulations of the trip helping was that the girls couldn't help in the cemetery. We had to like clean up around it. And a lot of the girls on the trip were really annoyed by this. They saw it as, like sexist, like, why can't we do what the men are doing? And I was like, well, let me ask, like, why can't we? I'm not going to automatically jump to this like sexist position. Why can't the girls go in the cemetery? And the girl that was leading or helping the trip at Zuni, the liaison, told us how women are so sacred in the Zuni culture. They bear the children, that we come from women, and that if they set foot in the cemetery, they would be at the mercy of the evil spirits and they would be in danger. So it didn't come from a place of negativity or of, keeping women like lower than men. It came from a place of positivity and wanting to keep them safe. So if the girls on the trip would have just asked about it or understood that Zuni constructed gender differently and had these different expectations of men and women, then I think they would have understood it better. But not everyone comes from anthropological background. So I understand that, it's hard to take away what you've learned and look at a culture through just clear eyes, which, I mean, that's the whole goal of anthropology. So it's a hard task to eliminate your biases, but I think it matters when you're looking at gender. So this is kind of just a couple other examples of how gender matters in societies. So this slide is kind of meant to tell you guys about two things. One, about how studying gender roles and dynamics gives researchers more accurate depiction of the culture they're studying with this Matrifocality article. And then this one on the right is talking about how these cultural changes that happen on the outside because of like an economic restructuring, it can have effects on the gender dynamics within the culture that it never intended to. So this Isthmus Zapotec Matrifocality, this is a culture in Mexico that kind of, without looking at gender as a variable, one could infer that men have this dominant position in society, because with this bilateral kinship and patrilocal residence, this means that they trace their lineage from the mom and dad's side, but with the patrilocal residence, they reside with the father's family. And alongside that, men have very formal roles within the society, so they're in the limelight. But when you kind of like look at like under the surface, it's kind of like an iceberg. It's like the men's formal roles are at the top of the iceberg, and then when you look underneath, it's all of the informal roles that women have, basically keeping the integrity of the social structure intact with, they're keeping families intact. They're doing different things with their power to keep violence at bay, just different things, so that this matrifocal system, so the women being the focality of the social structure, they have this power to keep it in place. It can exist alongside this patriarchal superstructure because of the differences at the levels that they operate, that the men's formal roles are really at the top, and then the underneath are the women's informal roles that you get and you see, and it really highlights that the importance of looking at these informal roles, because early on in like anthropological studies, a lot of anthropologists were men, so men would go into a society and follow the men around because the men would talk to them, it was just easier to get a conversation with the men, I guess. So we really had one side of the story. What?
Kind of a built-in bias.
Yeah, the androcentric bias, yes. The male bias of anthropology was very strong at first. So, we just saw the male roles, which is great. We need to learn about the male roles, but we weren't getting the full picture, learning about these informal roles that were going on, between women gossiping, or women just like passing each other and like, oh, did you hear this, or like, so then they can fix it at home or something, so that is just showing the importance of looking at the whole picture of gender. And with this second example, Cherokee Women Gender Roles. Dunaway in 2000 wrote a paper about, this was mainly talking about how this interaction with outside capitalist economy caused restructuring inside the economic system of the Cherokee culture. They went from this agricultural society where male and female gender roles were pretty complementary, and they had this common goal of, you know, increasing the yield of crops. And then when, and in addition to this, the roles of women were essential to the survival of the community. So they started out at this high position in society. They had this status that they had earned from helping within the society. And then when the capitalist economy started restructuring, this created this new division of labor. So there was this emphasis on hunting and warfare for men, as well as trading. And the fur trade was really big in this, but European settlers wouldn't really have any contact with women. So the liaisons for the tribe had to be men talking to the European nations. So this really increased the male importance in society because, you know, they were the only ones that could contact or have contact with the European settlers. And it increased the women's workload because they had more things to do in the field because the men were now occupied with this new division of labor. And then it also decreased women's importance in society because they couldn't get any new job opportunities. They were kind of really excluded from the fur trade and just like by the European settlers. I think it was a simple restructuring of the economy that didn't intend to change the women's status and the gender roles within the community, but because of the nature of the contact and the nature of the society that they were talking to, it had this unintended consequence, which kind of changed the gender roles and the dynamics, as well as just like changing the whole status of the women in society completely. So now to the Two-Spirit tradition. As we said earlier, Two-Spirits are neither man nor woman. They're individuals who embody a combination of both masculine and feminine spirits. And within the society, they participate in both male and female gender roles. This is different from the binary construction of gender because whenever you look at it through that lens, sex and gender are connected, and there's this emphasis on sexuality. So say a Two-Spirit who was born biologically male is with just a cisgender male. As a Two-Spirit, that wouldn't be considered homosexual in their cultures because they identify as different genders. But when outsiders came in and just observed it from what they were seeing, they saw it as a homosexual relationship, which kind of caused a lot of institutionalized homosexuality in Native communities. But historically, they held high status. As I said earlier, they had this power that was revered and respected. It is said to be a universal tradition within Native North America, but it's very diverse. It's really hard to talk about it in a general sense because each tribe has such a unique way of integrating this gender fluidity into their society. So just to give you an idea of the differences and I guess some similarities that they have, I'm just going to talk specifically about the Zuni Two-Spirit tradition. It's the Lahamana and then the Navajo Nadle, just so you can see specifically how each tribe constructs gender. First, though, I want to talk about the history of the term Two-Spirit because it's got a long history. It's when European settlers and just outsiders came in, they've historically referred to Two-Spirit as berdache, meaning kept boy or male prostitute, and that was seen as pretty degrading and demeaning. So in 1990 at the Native American and First Nations Gay and Lesbian Conference in Winnipeg, they coined this phrase Two-Spirit, and it is derived from an Ojibwa phrase, which means those who carry both a masculine and feminine spirit. This is kind of a quote from two prominent authors that write on the tradition. Wesley Thomas is actually a Navajo Two-Spirit, and they're just kind of talking about this as their way of taking back this role, and they're like decolonizing it. It's the way that they are kind of bringing it back to what it was before forced assimilation practices caused this shift in status to really mark them as deviant. So the Zuni Lahamana is probably one of the most studied two-spirit traditions. There's a wealth of literature, and it's because of Will Roscoe wrote on Wewa. He was a prominent two-spirit. I'll talk about her later, but it's really interesting that the two-spirit tradition in Zuni has cosmological roots. So in their emergence story, when the Zuni people emerged from the 5 worlds that they, or the 4 worlds into the 5th world, being this world, from their emergence place, they were set out on 2 journeys to find the middle place where they were destined to settle. And when the first group was led by a brother and a sister, and at night when they camped and when they were sleeping, the brother defiled the sister, and she immediately woke up and sprung 10 supernatural offspring. And the first of those supernatural offspring was the man-woman Kachina, named Kolamana, which is there's a root, and then the Lahamana is the main part of that word, which of the Kachina is their spirits of the Kachina religion. I won't get too much into that because that's a whole nother thing. But the fact that there's these cosmological roots shows that there's there was a special place in society for 2 spirits. And within Zuni specifically, individuals become a 2 spirit really early on in age, probably like 2, 3, 4, when they're observed showing a proclivity to gender non-conforming behavior. So say a little boy wanted to play inside with his mom instead of go like play outside with boys, or, you know, just something to show that there's a proclivity for the opposite gender role of what they should be observed performing from a very early age. And then assuming that's not just a one-time thing, that it continues throughout their childhood. At puberty, they would be initiated as a 2 spirit. And so just Wewa, as I was talking about, she was observed at, I think, the age of 3 or 4, just wearing a longer shirt than the other boys and just wanting to play with the girls instead of hang out with the boys. And then this 2 spirit, this 2 spiritness continued throughout puberty, and she was initiated as a 2 spirit, and she adopted female dress, and that's what she wore for the rest of her life. Wewa's pretty important to the Zuni, I guess, history and stuff, because she was said to be the most remarkable member of the tribe. She served as an artist, a craftsman, a member of the Kachina Society, which within Zuni, that's reserved only for males. So the fact that there was this 2 spirit identity that allowed her to be initiated into this all male religious society, as well as she was able to construct pottery for Zuni. And there's an old taboo at Zuni. Within the economic restructuring, I don't think it applies anymore, but within the context of Wewa, men were not able to create pottery or go get the clay because it was said they would taint the spirit of the pot. So the fact that Wewa could transcend those gender boundaries and create beautiful works of art with pottery, as well as participate as a ritual specialist within the Kiva societies, shows that there's this emphasis on societal and economic roles. So there's has nothing to do with who his partner was or who like his sexual attraction or romantic attraction. It really was what he was providing within society. And on the left is just a picture of her in her female dress. And then, so the Navajo Nadle, the 2 spirit tradition, also has cosmological roots and present in the creation story. It's a little different from the Zuni, that the 2 spirits of the Navajo were first encountered in the 3rd world when they were emerging from the worlds below. They traveled into this world and they met turquoise boy and white shell girl. They were twin hermaphrodites. So there's an emphasis on the intersex individual for the Navajo two-spirit tradition. The twins created the first pot by shaping it out of clay and weaving the first basket from reeds. So these two essential aspects of the Navajo life were created by two spirits in their creation story. And then when there was a great flood in the third world, the turquoise boy created a ladder out of reeds that allowed the Navajo people to be saved and climb up through the fourth world into the fifth world. So there's, like I said, the emphasis on the hermaphrodites and the intersex people that the Navajo Nadle, the people that become two spirits, are usually intersex individuals, and they see this as a calling from the spirits or a calling from God, the gods, that this person has the mental capacity to be able to take on these two roles, because as revered and sacred as it was to be able to transcend this boundary line, it wasn't seen as easy. They had double the work. They were doing male gender roles, they were doing female gender roles. So as respected as it was a calling that would create certain hardships too, with just the certain jobs that they could fulfill. On the right here, this is Hosting Claw. He's another prominent two-spirit from the Navajo. He was a ceremonial leader and a noted weaver. So he was able to become a chanter and a singer, which is a predominantly male role. But the fact that he was also able to become a noted weaver, which was a female role, also shows his, two-spirit proclivity and his ability to really transcend those boundary lines as well. The Navajo is one of those cultures that they believe that the Nadle knew everything, and that this is a quote from an elder that the Navajo thought that their culture would end without the Nadle. So they had this very revered and respected status within the Navajo. So this is, I wonder how I can, okay, there we go. This is just going to be kind of an example of how I'm studying two spirits within the archaeological record. The two-spirit tradition is so vast, and it encompasses so many different things and so many different tribes, that I kind of wanted to compress some stuff and give you some concrete stuff to learn about. So this is a paper that myself and Dr. Todd are working on, looking for two-spirit burials because of this, these ancient roots that the two-spirit tradition seems to have, with the presence in these origin stories, as I just talked about, and the ethnographic history that we see. The ethnographic accounts have started like right when contact happened. So this paper really focuses on, my question was that I wanted to reanalyze burial data from various sites in the Southwest. The three sites being Wind Mountain, Pakime, and Hiwaku. And this map over here kind of shows you the general vicinity of these sites. I got inspiration from this from Will Roscoe's book, The Zuni Man Woman, that I read that he wrote on Wewa's life. He identified a possible two-spirit burial at Hiwaku. And as I was reading that, I just kind of was trying to consider if I'd ever read about any type of gender fluidity found in the archaeological record. And I really hadn't read much on this. So I wanted to see if I could find a way to interpret gender in the archaeological record, instead of just, when analyzing it, just recording the sex and kind of equating that to the gender of the individual. And from this paper, I kind of went off of this Binford Sachs approach. And this is just when burying someone, they will be treated in death as they were in life. So it kind of would be assumed that a two-spirit identity would follow an individual into the grave, because that's who they were in life. So they would be buried with things that could indicate a two-spirit identity. And there was a couple other studies that I kind of drew off of that found archaeological evidence in the Southwest depicting two-spirit identities. I don't know if Dr. Todd or Dr. Chris want to talk a little bit about their paper if I don't touch on everything, but they did an analysis of human effigies at the Casas Grandes world, correlating sex with gender through clothing that was presented on effigies. And they found a female effigy that was associated with clothing predominantly associated with male. So she was wearing a red strap sandal and a poncho, and she had a male-like chest. And then there was a clear depiction of the vagina. So, you see that possible two-spirit identity with both attributes of both genders. And then Merritt Munson, in her analysis, she looked at gendered activities depicted on classic Mimbres pottery, and she identified 12 gender contrary identifiers that contradicted biological sex or both genders. So the trend that was kind of being seen was these individuals were being depicted with either the opposite genders identifiers or both. So I kind of took that and went with that too. I looked over a lot of excavation data, and a lot of it's hard to find a concrete link between sex and burial goods to find a way to interpret gender. So I kind of had to pull from like these iconographic lines of evidence and these different archaeological, I guess, evidence from the material record. But I found 5 possible two-spirit burials, which I was not expecting really to go into this finding much, honestly, because the data was a lot and hard to look through. But I found a female with a pipe at the Wind Mountain burial excavation data. And this is really important because in the Southwest, pipes or cloud blowers are seen associated with male ritual specialists. So the fact that this female was buried with an important part of a male aspect of society could show this person's two-spirit identity in her life. And then in the Casas Grandes burial data, I found 1 male buried with macaws, which was an animal predominantly depicted with women. And it was also said that women were the caretakers of the macaws in life. And then 1 female buried with 2 quadrupedal mammals, which these animals were usually associated with men. And I really took from this Merritt Munson's data. She found that almost always men were depicted with these mammals. So just these opposite animals that were usually depicted with the other gender shows that these 2 people could have possibly been 2 spirits in life. And then lastly, the 1 female burial with a long skirt and a woven kilt from Hiwaku, prehistoric Zuni settlement. This is the burial that Will Roscoe found, and I was glad that I was able to find this in the excavation data that I found for Hiwaku. But then there was also another female burial associated with hunting artifacts and an earthenware penis. So actually that burial is really interesting because at first glance, when the first excavation records started, it was sexed as male because of the artifacts that were associated with her. And then later they found out that it was a female grave. And that makes these hunting artifacts and the earthenware penis that much more interesting and showing this possible two-spirit identity in life. So these are just some quotes that I think are important to talk about because gender fluidity isn't a new concept that is being introduced. It's kind of coming back, actually. And a lot of people, I'm not going to read these, they all kind of say the same thing, just that non-binary genders seem to have this extensive time depth and that they were probably recognized by the original colonizing groups, so that when looking at the archaeological record, it's important to include gender and gender fluidity as a variable, especially when interpreting graves. And that's kind of what I want this paper to call attention to, is the importance of looking at gender and not just sexing a skeleton and moving on, really looking at the associated artifacts and different lines of evidence to be able to find these two-spirit identities within the archaeological record. And then this is just, I kind of wanted to highlight the connection between two spirits and spirituality, since these individuals were identified as liminal figures spanning this middle between what it means to be a man and what it means to a woman. They're seen as filling these roles as important ritual leaders and important specialists. You know, they come from a spiritual dimension. They a lot of times this supernatural vocation was the way that they were called to be a two-spirit. So a lot of times shamanism and two-spirit individuals kind of went hand in hand. These are just some cool quotes. I'm not going to read them all because that's a mouthful and I don't want to bore you guys, but I think this is kind of an important thing to identify. And there's a lot of different ethnographic examples. So like male Siberian shaman costumes have a lot of female symbols. There's some male shamans that become like their female spirits that they're embodying using female voice. They have a special female language that they're spoken when they're embodying that female spirit. The Navajo Nadle in the Navajo language translated means one who is transformed. So this liminal figure in their community. The Mojave similarly believed that female shamans were powerful, but they believed that two-spirit shamans were the most powerful of all because they had that spiritual power from both men and women. And then this last slide is kind of just some two-spirit scholars, links, and additional readings because my interest in gender was kind of, a long journey, as you guys heard earlier, but I don't identify as two-spirit. I'm non-native, I'm cisgender. And so these couple authors and just this two-spirit journal, these books are able to kind of convey what it means to be two-spirit in a way that I could never do, being non-native and non-two-spirit. So I think it's important to center Indigenous voices and let you guys know that these are really great ways to learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, maybe after we post the discussion today, you can give us some links of reading material that people should be looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Do you want to start off here?
There you are.
So, gosh, a couple questions.
Lots of questions.
Yeah. So Thomas Riccio, in his presentation, looking at the various Indigenous tribes that he worked with in a theatrical capacity, showed us a slide in Asia of the particular group he worked with, where the men would wear during their ceremonial, at least one part of their ceremony, a women's garb. Mm-hmm. And then the women, ritual specialist or shaman, would wear the men's garb. So maybe a symbol of the fact that you are a walker between two worlds, ordinary and non-ordinary reality. So that if you're already gifted with that transition, that bridge, maybe it applies. Also, what happens when you take someone and support their proclivities, their tendencies? They can flourish, they can flower, they can bring their gifts into society, as opposed to forcing them to spend a lifetime defending themselves and in danger as we do today.
Can I just
also, it's interesting that
I was going to make one comment on that.
Sure,
part, and you continue your discussion. But even that idea of like you're saying, not allowing that natural thing to come forth. When I was a young child, being left-handed in schools, they made us wear metal brackets to get us to not hold our hands certain ways because we're left-handed people were something that needed to be corrected.
Deviant, right?
Deviant. So, anyway, yeah. So
well, even sinister. From sinestra, from the left, right? We have this association of it being deviant, even in the languaging of it, left and right. Yeah.
Continue.
Wow. You were actually made to wear a brace, so you couldn't use your left hand.
But they made us wear metal brackets to hold our hands straight because you don't want left-handed people curled when they write. So that was one of the limitations.
Wow, interesting. So, it's interesting that rock stars wear female garb, glitter, eye makeup, long scarves and colorful clothing. We have a friend who's a Jimi Hendrix revival performer, right? He does Jimi Hendrix on stage. And he tells us that he shops in thrift stores in the women's department for all of his garb. And he goes for the most
sequins
colorful. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a thing and it's more and more accepted. I think you have a kilt. You have a utility kilt.
I have a utility kilt.
Yes. Your Celtic roots
I do.
Celebrated. Yeah. And so, and the myth, the story that we tell around a phenomenon so much set the stage, right? You're, so it's interesting. you want to open this up to questions?
Well, let me ask a question. First of all, getting back to your initial thoughts that you spoke of when we started the presentation, you talked about the importance, the impact of being able to integrate this understanding into society, because where we're at as a society, where we're growing, where the pain, where the need for healing needs to take place, you're bringing forth something that I didn't understand the full significance before today's discussion of the impact of this whole concept and how it could impact society in general on a global way. So I wanted you to comment on that a little bit more about why you, after your research has really opened up yourself to a whole new understanding of how we proceed as humanity and a way of healing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a modern two-spirit movement that has been wanting to take back and decolonize, just like specifically the two spirits, because that's mainly what my knowledge is. But they're trying to take back the identity, and it really has come to mean a lot of different things within the modern two spirit. Whenever the word was coined, the tradition, I talked historically about how it really was focused on like societal and economic roles, but within like this modern context, it has been used like by people who identify as gay and lesbian, who identify as, transgender, transsexuals, transvestites. There's this special part of Native people taking back the role that identifying as it within the LGBTQ system. And that's a lot kind of where I want to go with my research, is looking at it contemporarily in a context is where do two spirits fit in the modern LGBTQ movement? Where do they fit within this system that kind of started outside of their culture within the Western culture, LGBTQ people, rising up and wanting to be seen and heard and have a voice. When Native communities have kind of always been pushed down, that where do the two spirit individuals fit? Because they're part of the LGBTQ society, but they have that special spiritual attribute that makes them so specially Native that I think I want to really learn more about how they fit and within their personal identities, how they're going to navigate this new changing, perception of gender within this larger context. But I forgot my point.
Do you feel there's a lot of call for a lot of pronouns now in the mix? Mm-hmm. People choosing pronouns by which they want to be identified, people calling for the dissolution of gender roles, people saying, no, there's 1,000 gender roles. Where do you stand on that? I'm absolutely all for pronouns. I think it's respectful, but I also think that gender is important, as I've kind of reiterated this whole time. You can't just kind of get rid of it, because society is structured around different aspects of gender. And that's not saying that the gender binary is, that's how people kind of see it. And they're like, oh, you can't get rid of that. But I think that the understanding of different cultures' genders is much more important to the fact that gender is real, it's important, it matters, and it's socially constructed. So if we open up space and center different ways of understanding gender, then I think understanding it as just people that don't study gender would become easier, and it would become a more accepting view of gender fluidity, because there's this understanding of the ways in which I don't fit female, I don't fit male, I'm really fitting somewhere in between. So this kind of emerging third gender, I don't know if there's more than that, but it's interesting that, and it's important for us to understand that they have been recognized in the past and given a role of status. So they're different, and it's a positive thing.
If I could jump in for just a moment,
please.
There's a question that actually builds right off of what you were saying Laura, that is on the chat. And so let me ask this to Mikaela here, if that's okay. But one of the folks who's watching it asked, what, let me see, I got to pull it up here. What was the identity of being a two-spirit, or was the identity of being a two-spirit something that was seen as desirable? What I mean by that is, was it an honored position in society, unlike our society in which children with alternate proclivities are bullied, seen as confused, or being at odds or difficult?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely varies within different cultures, but overall it was seen as like a calling from the spirits, or just who that child was. So in that Fred Martinez, the Navajo boy that was murdered that I talked about a little earlier, that there's a great documentary. It's called Two Spirits. I think it came out in like 2009. There's everyone that knew Fred in his life talking about him, and they would just talk about how he was this personality that like would light up the room, that he was meant to be a two-spirit. It's not, there wasn't any choice of who he was. It was who he was and who he was supposed to be. And the fact that other Navajo men kind of took that with negativity shows just these forced assimilation practices into the larger Western cultures, and the gender binary has had lasting effects, and they've been negative. And it's important to try to decolonize gender in a way that celebrates two-spirit identities, because they were celebrated historically. I actually wrote a paper on just cross-culturally looking at the status change that came from Western culture imposing the gender binary on Native communities. And I found a couple trends, but mainly it was that they went from this space of high status to they were marked as deviant, as marginalized. It was hard for them to find, work, and they would be sometimes kicked off reservations because of this view that they were wrong.
So Native culture, it was totally turned around for a while to adopt. Well, even your use of to decolonize is putting a little heavy hand onto all of Western culture. We came over like the Borg, and we ruined you. There's a little bit of bias even in that term. So, I mean, it would be nice to look at truly what Western civilization brought, but not blanket it as all wrong and evil. So I mean, if you're talking about de-biasing something, then we need to look at the language that we're using and the implications in the subtext of it.
Yes.
So
another comment in the chat room, Sharon says, the term two-spirit sounds like another binary construct of gender. Why isn't it polyspirit or some other terminology to expressing and communicating about gender identity?
I mean, that's kind of how the Native Americans took back their role. So they named it two-spirit, which, like I said, binaries are good to start with. So, I mean, giving us a foundation of like the two-spirit term, giving us this position that they accept, kind of allows us to study it that much better, because we're not calling it something that, is degrading or negative in any view. But yeah, I've never really thought about the fact that two-spirit, because, binary, but I think that is something that they wanted to call it. So it's their term. So
can I add something?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Nancy Bonavillian, who wrote a lot on Native North American nations, she says that two-spirit is really honorable because it pulls in both spirits. Both a person can be both male and female, so it's holistic. So it's not binary, it's holistic. So it's both aspects of male and female.
And along the same line, as Mikaela mentioned in the origin stories, a lot of times the world was, in terms of the cosmology, divided into male forces and female forces. And sometimes that's even portrayed into certain sorts of deities and whatnot. And so I think that a lot of that, as Mikaela was just saying, comes directly from the cosmological underpinnings of the tradition.
You know, even I was going to ask how far back this goes. And even in the Paleolithic art, there are a couple of artifacts that truly need to be interpreted as showing both male and female genitalia combined into one. I mean, so obviously that's the interpretation. And though that interpretation is controversial, I think this understanding gives it a lot of credence, a foundation.
Right.
That this has long been recognized. And so who knows how far back in time, if 1% of a population is born with both male and female attributes, that would have happened back in the Ice Age and 30 to 40,000 years ago as well, it would have been expressed. And so maybe we could even look at those pieces of artwork and say maybe that was accepted from the beginning.
Right. In fact,
as
even
special and beautiful and honored, spiritual.
And even with our own work, as we look at ancient artifacts that have been brought forth as posture, that inspire us for postures, we look at the artifacts, and many times we say, just because it was given a name or representation by the researchers as a male or a female, most of the time it's male. The experience may be very feminine. Is this really a male? Let's look more closely at the sculpture, because you cannot tell from the sculpture specifically. And
well, we've had a lot of debate with the Lion Man sculpture.
Lion Man
is one of the oldest, 40,000 years old, out of Germany. And our interpretation is that maybe it's both. Was it the lion mensch, the lion woman? It looks like it could be.
And this connecting point between shamanism and two-spirit makes so much sense. Not that to be a shaman, you need to be a two-spirit, but the other way around, that there's a special connecting point for someone who's open to the ears to both worlds of spirit. That's
the definition of a shaman,
right?
A traveler between ordinary and non-ordinary,
and
right?
Traveling between even the gender aspect of it, being totally open to both. So that would make sense. There's a tremendous power in that thought.
And building on that, Paul, cross-culturally, a lot of times shamanic literature talks about shamans being transformed into members of the opposite sex. And so you'll have male shamans, biologically male shamans, who will, as part of the trance experience, become a female, or a female who will, as part of the trance experience, become a male as part of that system.
In the trance state, how permeable the boundaries are and how we shapeshift around. Yeah, Christine?
I was just about to say that, what you said, Laura, so you beat me to the punch. But no, we see cases where during the shamanic initiation where the person will end up marrying a spirit, and that spirit will be there marrying in their embodiment within their own being. So they house both spirits within them. And that's out of Pierre Zbyszki's book on shamanism.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. I always thought that, well, you talked about the informal women's roles. And I have always found it interesting how in various times and eras when women were not allowed to overtly hold power, we found ways to hold power in those cracks and those opportunities. The courtesans during the Renaissance were talking with the men in those social times and influencing. There were some famous ones that were able to influence the men's minds and help shape society. The power plays, the power brokers, oftentimes were the women in social eras where they designed the parties, made the invite list, and went around and kind of got this group of men and this group together. You know, they were playing with chess pieces to orchestrate different conversations, different insights, different ideas. Or famously, how we whisper in a man's ears wonderful ideas and let them believe that it's their ideas so that it would be in a container that could actually move through society and all of this. And we all know that we've grown up with mothers who exerted their power and their influence, who in various ways, I mean, you know, we watch women being masters of fomenting our ideas, our influence, our vision through the cracks of society and influence. It's about being influencers, right? So I think that's so interesting, the informal and the formal power plays.
Yeah.
So, and it's also interesting that in the whole dynamics of sex, women are the deciders. We're the gatekeepers. We're the ones who say yes or no. And so the whole Me Too is about women or about men who defy that and force the issue, right? But we really are the keepers of the power there in so much of it. So, okay, back to the Neolithic, the fertility rites. So many of the statues that we work with, so many of the experiences that we work with have to do with celebrating fertility in nature, right? Fertility rites, nature, we see you, we see the power, the forces. The goddess culture that Maria Gimbutas and others famously interpret the Neolithic of Europe as goddess culture. Where do you all stand on that? Was there, in your opinion, from your anthropological lens at looking at looking at society, or was the goddess culture just a myth that served the women's liberation movement to say, hey, at one point, women, we were honored. Women were given power, given say. I mean, it is through us that new life, new human life comes. Where do you stand on that, each of you? I think I've touched on a hotbed here.
I was gonna say, Todd and I were joking, danger, danger. Buddhist has been heavily critiqued within the anthropological community. And I would say I'm fortunate that I do the American Southwest, North America, and Mesoamerica. So I get to step back from that. And so the groups that Mikaela and I study and that we deal with, we're fortunate because women's roles were always so important and they did hold the power, especially in a matrilineal, matrilocal society. Yeah. And so it's kind of interesting because we would say it was always there. So going back to Gimbutas, she's correct that fertility was important. We see that in the New World and the Old World, that there's always been that importance. So moving it back to the American Southwest, most of the American Southwest, both in pottery, origin stories, myths, all has to do with fertility. And fertility is always a male and female union. You cannot have it with anyone. And I love the term, help me out, Todd, I'm blanking, gender working together.
Yin and yang, or complementary.
Complementarity, gender complementary. You have to have both. You cannot have any species, at least in the mammal kingdom, survive without male and female and working together in harmony. So a lot of our groups in North America are very focused on fertility, making sure that corn grows. Corn is very much a gender issue with male and female. The corn is female. Rain that falls is male. The Kachina puts rain down, which is like semen on the ground. And so you have all this gender stuff going on with fertility and you cannot pull that apart. So I've done enough talking. I'll turn it over to Todd.
I think Mikaela did a great job in her discussion with the Nodley, talking about the fact that what makes the Two-Spirit so special is that it combines both the male and the female into a coherent whole. And that's what, in the mind of the Navajo, if I understand it correctly, Mikaela, please help me out if I'm misunderstanding it. That's what creates the coherence that allows Navajo society to continue on. So it isn't necessarily that one individual is all that important. Rather, it's that combination of the male and female being put together that allows Navajo culture to continue on. I personally am quite skeptical of the mother goddess cult idea in the Paleolithic, because that isn't consistent with what we see cross-culturally amongst many of these groups, in which it isn't male or female that's being emphasized. It's both of them and this cooperation between them, which I think is what the Two-Spirit does so effectively in many of these situations, recognizing there's a lot of cultural variation, what Two-Spirits do and how they're defined. But most of the time, in fact, I think in almost all of the different tribal groups, you see this emphasis on the Two-Spirit being a place where there's this joining between the male and the female, this balance that is so important within Native communities. Mikaela, did I mess that up too much?
No, yeah, that was good. I don't really know much about the earth fertility, the goddess stuff, but I'm thinking that, like Todd said, and Christine both, there's such an emphasis on like both male and female together joining, that maybe with the women's liberation that they just needed to put the women like at the top, that since they were kind of contrasting a culture that really didn't. So it was that contrast to show that yes, women were important. They weren't the only important aspect, but as you see, like historically, they were important, and it needs
taking
to be
their cues
observed
from nature, and they're saying male and female in balance is how nature operates. And so should human society. And so if women have been pushed off to the side, we need to take our rightful place to create balance again. And I think that's the lesson involved here. Yeah.
Are there any questions? You're welcome to raise your hands using the functions
look
of
at the
Zoom. Neshappy, you've put quite a few pieces of information in the chat room. I can't read
so
all of that.
Open up your mic if
but
you
you're
would,
welcome
Neshappy, and post them to us here.
Yeah.
So
and anyone else
you'll
would
do
like
better
to
than us
participate.
reading it.
Yeah, that's always better. So, but in the meantime, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Mikaela for her presentation, which is really interesting and sort of really well communicated. I don't have access to the whole of the chat because my Wi-Fi dropped off. When I came back on, I can only see what's been on since I got back on.
Yes.
I remember asking an earlier question around question of women's roles being informal. I know that Chris and Todd put a response to that. But I suppose, I mean, I'm not familiar with the culture that you've studied. I'm more familiar with the African cultures. And again, I suppose have some questions around what we might now perceive as perhaps less formal roles. The example of the Yoruba is one that I've mentioned, where women did have very powerful formal roles in the pre-colonial era. And again, you know, missionaries and colonial administrations largely just wanted to speak to the men, you know, because that's what they were accustomed to doing. And so it helped the men in those societies to sort of, you know, push the women further off stage, as it were. And it's only now that some of those older roles, which we heard about, you know, from our grandparents, you know, are now being sort of reasserted. I mean, to this day in Yoruba land, women control the markets. You know, you know, the movement of goods, you know, it's all done by the women, and their roles as a sort of market leaders is increasingly being reasserted now. But
advertisers want to pitch to women. We're the ones who do most of the shopping for household goods. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was more than shopping. You know, the men were farmers, and they gave the produce to their wives, who took it to the markets. The women controlled all the markets. They would, you know, sell the produce and give a share of it back to their husbands. Yes. You know, both my grandmothers were far richer than my grandfathers. You know, they were wealthy women. You know, so but yeah. So I suppose I'm just questioning what might now appear to be informal and what it might have been like. That was the question I was raising.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's so hard to talk about things in like a modern context because of this whole, you know, men and women are now able to do the same things. Mainly, there's still that like gender gap and stuff, but the opportunities are relatively the same. So I think that women's formal roles have probably increased in the fact that they're out in the workforce. As I was talking about the Zapotec culture, the women are the ones that are going to the market to sell things because they could communicate with the larger Spanish culture because they could speak Spanish. And so they were the only ones that were able to sell things and make the money that way for the household. So they had this important formal role there that kind of shifted when markets became a thing with this like capitalist incorporation. So I think that roles are kind of always shifting and changing within communities when it comes from like economic restructuring and just changes within the community that come from different aspects that come from maybe like cultural blending So I think that formal roles have increased, but I think informal roles are always going to be those, you know, kind of working under the surface, trying to like keep a household intact, or trying to, you know, deter violence, or even just like protect each other from violence within like a society. If there's a lot of male violence, or a lot of you know, just toxic masculinity that provides a lot of male, like violence against women, that those informal roles are always going to be important with kind of women supporting women, if that makes sense.
I have two short stories to share.
Thank you, Ms. Happy.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Happy. And one is that we were attending in Santa Fe the Folklight Festival opening ceremonies, and they brought in the gentleman who pioneered giving microloans to small communities in third world countries. And he said, he was celebrating women, and he said, and I'm quoting him, that he always wants to give the microloans to the women, not the men. Why? Because men will go out and spend the money on some status symbol for themselves, whereas women will go out and they will buy the grinder for the grains. They will buy the well pump. They will buy the materials so that all the women in the collective can begin making goods to sell, so they can send their children to school and put food on the table. And that women are about creating economy, not just spending it for a one-off. He said that. And the, what was the other story? I'll think of that in a minute. But yeah. So an interesting difference right there.
So we don't have any more hands up or questions, but unless if I read through the chat room here some more. But anyway.
Oh, women pharaohs. It's interesting that when the lineage happened, that the female was the pharaoh, she had to wear the male regalia, which included a false beard, very much a male symbol. But she ruled. Yeah.
So Mikaela, where do we go from here next with this? Where do you see this happening? What's your vision? Where would you like to see it go?
That's a very good question.
Where would you like to see it go?
That's a big question. I think that there's so many different gender movements with the LGBTQ and the Two-Spirit modern movement that I think that hopefully, this might be a little optimistic, but I think that if we can start teaching kids about not just the gender binary and just be more inclusive with just what we teach children, that there are other ways of being, that if someone's growing up and they feel as if they're in the wrong body, the wrong gender, that they can articulate that in a way that it's not judged, that it's not deviant, but accepted, like Laura was talking about. If we accept these differences in gender, that people will grow up to thrive, and it'll be like much more positive, as opposed to marking gender, the concept of gender fluidity in general, as deviant, and that any deviation from, you know, a male or female box is seen as wrong. So
those doctors who really decide the fate of an infant who is born with both genitalia, oh my gosh, I know parents nowadays are saying, no, we're going to wait, and we're going to wait until that child can articulate who they are and what they want to be. So there's that improvement in things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a great documentary on, I think it's from National Geographic. It's called The Gender Revolution. It's just I don't remember the main host of the documentary, but she goes around and is just learning about gender. And there's a certain woman on there that was born intersex. Her parents never told her. And then later in life, she found her birth certificate and found that she had originally been like a male, or they had deemed her a male, but her parents were like, oh, it's female, or something happened that she was like, this makes sense. You never told me this. And I felt like I was in the wrong body my whole life. Wow. So, you know, it's in that instance, it was like the parents made a decision that really impacted the trajectory of this individual's life.
Yeah.
How many children who it's been decided for them feel like they've grown up in the wrong body?
Yeah, exactly.
Analysis. Yeah. So that would be a tough call.
And Professor Todd, she referenced the paper that you did earlier on. Could you speak a little bit more, give us a little bit more information?
Actually, I'm going to turn that over to Chris because she was the senior author on it. So I'd be happy to talk about it. But
well, I always go to the male first.
Well, no,
Bias. Oh my God.
We speak each other's language. We're intertwined after 29 years. So I usually say, you need to finish my sentence. What am I saying? So I will call on him as I need to. He's my other half brain. We were looking at Casas Grandes effigy vessels from about 1250 to 1450. And many years ago, 2000, I saw shamanism, and I've talked about that to Cuyamonga numerous times with the male smokers metamorphizing the designs on the pottery to bird-headed anthropomorph male, female, two spirits in a publication in the early 2000s. But I started wanting to look at clothing on effigy vessels. Hold on, I'm gonna get a replica. You know me with my pottery.
Yes, thank goodness.
Yeah, this is a replica of one of these. And a lot of people said they're naked, and they're not. They've got a lot of clothing on them. And so I wanted to look to see if we could figure out what male and females wore at least as they were depicted on the iconography, and look at clothing. Being naked is a cultural phenomenon. South American groups, to be fully dressed is to wear a little belt around the waist. You're fully dressed when you have this belt around you in South American groups. So very much a cultural phenomenon. So in my dissertation, I thought these were not showing clothing, but then in 2015, we started looking at that. So what we found was the male smoker effigies are holding the pipes. The men tend to have these long sashes across the body, and that's very male. We see that in the Maya area. We see that at Zuni. It's the way that male put on stuff. Men tend to wear really big turbans and headgear. That tends to be male. Men tend to wear sandals. That was something that the iconography, over 125 vessels, we kept finding males would have the sandals on, except for one curious little female effigy that had more of a barrel chest. The men tend to have very straight posture, barreled shoulders, where females tend in this area. This one's actually a little different. Usually they have flaring hips to females. But the vessel that Mikaela talked about, this vessel had more of the male upper body and a shirt that was male, but the red strap sandal, which we think is related to status at Pakime, as part of the regalia. And so I want to add this. I do not have a photograph of it, but I was touring Santa Fe years ago. I was asked to be a consultant on a large exhibition in Santa Fe at the Museum of New Mexico. And I gave an evening presentation as I was touring private vessels on display in Santa Fe. There was actually a couple Casas Grandes vessels. They were hermaphrodites. They had both vaginas and penises in them. And so I know that these things existed, but they're in private collections in Santa Fe. And I know the person who owns them. So if you ever want to know who that is, Mikaela, I can get you that. But anyway, so we do have a couple of hermaphrodites as well in the iconography. So we know this happens. So yeah, just kind of a look at gender. But Todd and I have also a 2006 American Antiquity article where we look at gender roles and the gender fluidity, and also with male and females, their roles within shamanism as well. So we've been looking at pottery, and I keep thinking every few years we're done with this iconographic system until I entered Cuyamonga. Now as I'm learning stuff with you guys, I keep saying, oh, I have to write another paper. Oh, I have to write another paper. So I keep thinking I'm done, but I can't keep getting drawn back. But does that answer your question, Paul and Laura?
Yes.
You know, it's interesting how pink and blue, the colors, where pink is associated with girls and blue with boys. It used to be the reverse.
Yeah.
So even how much meaning we put on something as simple as color can be totally opposite during different eras.
Yeah.
So
as Mikaela was saying, there's a huge amount cross-culturally, a huge amount of variation in terms of what men as a cultural category are expected to do and what women as a cultural category are expected to do. And so much so that in one particular group, a certain activity, they say boat making, might be considered something that only men do. And then another group, it's something that women and men do together. Then another group, it might be something that is, at least parts of it might be primarily done by women. And so when we think about gender, we tend to think of it kind of a static way, whereas not only does it change over time, as you were just saying, Laura, but it also changes cross-culturally, such that, for example, one of the things we notice on these Casas Grandes effigies is that the males were far more likely to be wearing what we interpret to be jewelry, these fancy lines on their arms, compared to what women are wearing. And the men had special foot gear that they wore, which was different from what women tended to wear. In certain groups, certain Native American groups, for example, men will have very long hair, whereas women will cut their hair to make rope. And so in those societies, women have very short hair, men have very long hair, which is
Australian Aboriginal.
Atypical, at least in our house, because I can't grow the hair, but it's atypical in many other cultural groups. So there's this incredible amount of variation cross-culturally in terms of even categories such as man and woman. And then you add in third genders, as Mikaela was talking about, and you see cross-culturally this tremendous amount of variation in terms of the way that gender is constructed and the roles it plays within societies, how it structures a society. But as Mikaela was saying, it's a fundamental building block to society. The family structure and gender structures are consistently a fundamental component to how societies are organized and how individual identity is organized.
I would add one more thing to what Todd said. Not only does it change from society to society, but as Mikaela was showing in some of the studies she presented, like the Dunaway article, we know it changes through time. So gender roles can shift as needed by society.
They can also shift in nature among other species. And
that's
we
true.
learn by observing how other species who don't have the intellectual debate going on like we do, from them. But look at the male birds. They're the colorful ones. They're the ones that do the strutting, elaborate dances to try to attract the females. The females are pretty drab by comparison to the males, which you could equate with this elaborate clothing, right, that you just cited, Todd. So interesting to look. Or they're the ones with the big horns so they can duke it out over the female and mating rights. So it's interesting. What can we learn from looking at the animal species out there?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because nature spends a lot of time differentiating the species and equipping them with, it's all about fertility and procreation, right? With equipping the species so that the strongest genes are passed on and evolutionarily the species flourish. So.
Perfect. Well, this has really been an amazing conversation for me, Mikaela. I just really have enjoyed
eye-opening.
Eye-opening and getting the depth of the work and research, and we could want to continue to hear more as we go along.
It's so important for our society to understand that this is not new and that we have a precedent of honoring people who are in between for however they're called by the spirits, by biology, whatever the reason is. And that when we're looking at equality and justice and social norms, we need a reset. We may need a major reset going on.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and then, I really appreciate what you're doing. Your generation is coming into a power, and the things are going to happen. And we look to leaders like yourself that have vision and have an ability to take us to a new place, because there's some confusion out there. There's some stuff going on in this world that we don't know where we're going to end up as humanity. So it's going to take smart, educated youngsters like yourself out there making things happen. So
and to look at history,
and look at history as well.
Historically,
right? Learn
look at
from
other
mistakes.
examples.
Yeah, exactly.
And what fascinating! We are such a strange and fascinating and marvelous species. Yeah. But to devote a lifetime to looking at us, yeah. And I'm not surprised. I heard that, Christine. I didn't hear it. What did you?
Yeah. And Christine and Todd, I mean, we really truly appreciate your work, what you're doing, your vision, and as an anthropologist, in the world of academia, pushing the envelope. Of course, that whenever you push the envelope brings criticism. Oh, wait a minute, you're stepping outside the boundaries. You're bringing on new elements and new things that maybe need to be brought forward. And there's resistance. There's resistance because people, again, just like we're talking about gender, academia is the same way. It wants to hold on to things. And so
the male bias. Let's talk about the male bias for a moment.
That's
here.
another discussion.
Not on you, Todd. You're one of the enlightened ones. Mikaela, I know that you had a lot to say about the male bias.
Yeah, so I mean, in anthropology, we call it the androcentric bias. It really started to be corrected when Sally Slocum wrote Woman the Gatherer. So really talking about correcting this male bias within human evolution. That like human evolution had been credited to, you know, hunting, eating meat. And she kind of went back and corrected it and said, well, we couldn't have had those things without, you know, some precursors, and that included women. So basically, the androcentric bias created this one-sided picture of human evolution. So men, we got big brains, we started hunting, we ate meat, and then it went from there. But we couldn't have done those things without women as well. And that's also discrediting, you know, the gathering aspect, not only gathering, but taking care of these newly born babies that are basically useless, you know. And early on in human evolution, it probably would have been, you know, mothers and children, because, you know, kind of looking to our primate relatives, you know, men or males within the primate family, or non-human primates, I should say, are very promiscuous. You know, they optimize their fitness by mating with many females. So that potentially could have been where we started, and women had to take care of these children with, you know, who they had around them, which was other women. So looking at it from that perspective, that women were important to human evolution, and looking to correct this androcentric bias means that we have to paint the picture of what women were doing as well, not just crediting everything to hunting and focusing on gathering as well, because the first tools were probably created to, you know, get tubers out of the ground and process these different types of plants that are hard to digest. So hunting was probably an aspect of our trajectory that came later, and it probably started with a certain amount of like scavenging and stuff like that.
Well, I was just going to add, in your I was saying newer anthro theory, I like some of the roles of the grandma, and there's been a lot of people that have now gone and look at women's role, but how really critical grandma's role is. And for people that come from a traditional society, we say yes, of course, but it's kind of funny as we as anthropologists looking at people under a microscope, we come to realities that well-functioning societies knew, like the role of the grandma. I just want to add that in there real quick. Sorry about the dog.
Looking at an elephant herd, it's the female matriarch that steers the ship there. And also it's interesting to look at, say, which we learned with James Tyrrell, the African safari guide, that promiscuity among lions is a survival mechanism for the females. If she mates with all the lions of the competing neighboring packs, they won't kill her cubs when they encounter them. They'll think they're those. That was eye-opening. And so
we actually see similar trend. I'm sorry. We also see some similar trends amongst certain groups. For example, there are some groups in South America where a woman will be pregnant and will actually sleep with additional males who will become surrogate fathers. And so the idea is that these other males will actually water the fetus, and then 2, 3, 4, however many men she slept with will all be seen as fathers who will contribute to the well-being of the child. And it's a way for women to integrate the child into a larger social network, as well as integrate themselves into a larger social network.
Yeah, Sarah Hrdy wrote a great book called Mothers and Others, and it's all about instead of looking from a place of, you know, connecting our evolutionary trajectory to hunting and just like rooted in kind of this like violent aspect, looking at it from Mothers and Others, that looking at from this, like, we had to have the need and the want to connect with others to be able to kind of like read each other's minds, that we needed to connect each other, and with mothers and daughters or sons or whoever, and the grandmothers, like Christine was talking about, that it's important to look at where the family unit would have started, and it would have started with Mothers and Others, and it's a great read.
And also, how does a environment shape the culture? So that's an interesting question. How does the needs of the society to survive in the jungle, the desert, the wherever it is, shape it so that you need to make alliances because you're a small tribe with whoever else, and it's just such an interesting question to see all that goes into play to create the taboos and the customs and the accepted norms of behavior, and all of that. I guess that's what makes anthropology so fascinating, isn't it?
Right.
So,
and like you pointed out earlier, we gotta look at the past to know where we're going in the future. We can't eliminate that. So it's
we're also, though, in an entire, we're such an experiment, right? We have a global society that's governed by technology, that we're shaping technology that can do so much. Are we going where we want to go? What are the danger signals ahead? Are we going to blow ourselves back up to the Stone Age? Are we going to transcend and start populating other planets and bring our colonization there? What are we doing?
The Martians don't want us.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to look at some of these basic questions, don't we?
Yeah.
What about anthropology of the future? What are you all looking at? Is that a course that you're teaching? Where's this trajectory going, and how inevitable is it? How inevitable is it that, given what we've done, that, what were the
trajectory?
Yeah. Do you question this? Do you have courses on this, Todd and Christine?
We don't have courses on it, but we've had some guest lectures over the last few years at Mizzou, and most of our peers actually sit back and say, what we are sure of, there's so much variation that we really don't know. And I don't mean to be a downer, but it's a very complicated system, right? But one of the things that we'll probably still see is the importance of women, men, and family. That's one of the truisms, and that whatever the gender takes place or that shaping will still probably live into the future, I would suggest.
I think that we're going to see a lot of research similar to what Mikaela is doing, where we're trying to understand how the past is integrating with the present and how that's also impacting the future, the questions you were raising. The one thing that there are lots of different disciplines that study humans, psychology, sociology, political science. They all have something to offer us in terms of our study of humans. But what anthropology gives us is exactly the sort of research that Mikaela is providing us in terms of being able to look at a cultural system holistically and look at how these various factors, these various variables are interacting with each other to produce the outcomes that we see. And so I think that we're going to switch away from the sort of the anthropology of the past, where we were doing kind of the National Geographic anthropology, going out to Timbuktu, wherever, and researching some group of people who we know very little about. And instead, we're going to start working with groups, including groups within our own society, who are, in some way culturally unique, culturally different, and try to understand the variables, the interaction of the past, the present, and the future in terms of the development of cultural systems and the behavior, the lifestyle of these individuals. Mikaela, what would you think?
Yeah, I think that it's a big question, definitely. But I think that we're in such a unique place with technology, and we have this global population. You have information at the tips of your fingers. You can Google anything. You can learn about halfway across the world that you've never been to. So I think that with this global population, anthropology is more important than ever, because it has this unique lens that teaches us about the differences within cultures and between that we need to know about. So we stop kind of like forcing, cultural assimilation, and just instead of taking these cultures and, when colonization started and they were like, oh, we're helping them be civilized, instead kind of flip it on its side and be like, well, if we learn more about the differences in cultures, then we can maybe preserve them and find a way to integrate them that's not a negative way, I guess, if that makes sense.
I think it's so interesting that we have so much available to us today to explore, to find our tribe, to find our expression. We're not contained in one culture. Talk about multiplicity. Now you can find any culture that you want to adhere to. We went last night to hear some African drumming with some white guys who became initiated into the tribe of the Ifa and the another Nigerian tribe. and to learn those ways because he was attracted to them. And so we can find our own expression. We can experiment. It's like a smorgasbord out there. We have so much freedom of expression. So I think that's the gift of our age, is that we can go exploring. We can find our realm. In terms of family, I know the son of some good friends who has decided he cannot do family. He's not going to have a family. A bit of a, we would call a misfit, but he's got something valuable to contribute. And he's off in Asia somewhere teaching English as a second language. And he had, the friend said, I was just devastated when my son came to me and said, Mom, I'm never going to be like you. I'm never going to find a wife, I don't think. I'm not going to give you grandchildren. Are you okay with that? And she had to stop and go, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to find your place and where you can thrive, wherever that is. And so we're even redefining family units. And
absolutely. And anthropologists have a word of fictive kinships, but they're the adopted, they're the people you put around yourself, they're the relationships you make. I hate the term fictive kinship, but that's what it's been called in the literature. But absolutely, and we see that as a very important alternative to these networks that we could call family. So yes, when you have that scenario you said, Laura.
Yeah. And when we have a world that's already overpopulated, maybe the definitions of family and the importance of having children change. Maybe our society is now so far removed from where we've been that we really have to look at, what do we need to be happy? What do we need going forward? What is our responsibility to our species, to our planet, to our world? I think everything is so in flux today that we need to continue to have these kinds of dialogues and see where we're going. And our world leaders need to have these dialogues. The social arbiters need to have these dialogues. We all need to contribute to this, to say, where are we going? Where did we come from? Where have we been? Where are we going? And what's it all about? What's our job here? And so I thank you for this conversation today to help open that up, and certainly to accept one another, to celebrate one another, and to help each other bring our gifts to fruition, to contribute. I think it's all about, what are we contributing to the general whole and to society? We need to find those gifts and contribute, and see and do it in a joyful and healthy and awoke. That's the new word, awoke way. So Mikaela, good for you for doing what you're doing. It was a beautiful presentation and so deep and meaningful and important for today.
Yeah.
So we thank you for your time.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
And we thank the VanPools, and we thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah.